I kind of look up, and you see language written in the stars. You can see that the whole Hebrew alphabet and parts of the Greek alphabet are there in the constellations above us. And that was known to ancient man. And then I kind of think, well, okay, so it's one vast sentence, What if that sentence is actually written across this broad bluish black canvas, and that canvas is actually a physical reflection of our mind?
Hey there, sinners. It's Adam Knox, and welcome to another interview with the devil. My devil today is definitely seen as one by various members of the clergy and some others out there. Mr. David Elkington is no stranger to press and publicity. Not only having lectured at Oxford and Cambridge, he's also been on several television shows, including Forbidden History. Both an academic and a historian specializing in ancient Egyptology, one of the things David is probably the most known for is the Jordan-led codices, a text or collection of texts, so to speak, written in actual lead and gold. Through at one point he's gotten quite a little bit of flack for, but one that describes the pre-Christian initiatory systems of Jesus and many of the others. He does allude to this and shares with us some very fascinating new discoveries and new work that'll be coming up in the next couple of months. But what we dive into today is some of the ideas in his ancient language of the sacred sound, the general acoustics of the mystic sphere. We explore everything from cymatics and the actual hidden wisdom of the ancients inside of everything from the Gothic cathedrals to the ancient Egyptian pyramids to the science that one could say, for lack of a better word, of sound and vibration and its effect on the brain and the actual physical body, our resonance with the earth, our effects on other planets, the concept of the aliens and the bicameral mind and our projections in terms of that, and how we explore or root back, revealing a little bit of a technology, if you will, as well as sidestepping into some of the more controversial experimentations in that specific technology. So without any further ado, sit back, relax, and remember to live deliciously.
David, welcome to the Cult of You.
I hope it retains that title and it doesn't become the cult of me.
I've listening to the gospel of wisdom that you and I shared in the early conversation. I don't see anything wrong with that realization. Wasn't it actually in Saint Shamir, one of the ancient language, where the concept, the word "me" and the concept of God was actually very deeply related, or the sound of me?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very true. I mean, what's interesting in terms of the mythology of the world is that there are so many extraordinary parallels to the degree where quite often the names of the hero are generally very similar, if not the same. We have obviously Jesus in the West. We've got Isu in various places like Japan, China, and so on and so forth. In Africa, it's Esau, and it goes on and on and on. But the expression of that's interesting because in French, the term I am is je suis.
Je suis. Huh?
Approximates the spelling of the name of Jesus. And of course, in all of these mythologies, the hero is literally an expression of self. I am.
Oh, yeah. Yes, exactly. So, I mean, let's open up on that one. Like, I loved you had such a nice root of etymology, and as well as kind of a play on words and understanding like the roots of words. And there's a big opening in terms of opening sacred space and looking and exploring sacred space. And one of that entrances is moving through the entrance. And you said it so wonderfully, in trance, and kind of entering into that deep mysticism of the experience. And your reference here of the hero, and one at least of the ways in which you articulate it, I know Eric Davis spoke about in Technosis about the idea that language was the first technology, or the first true, not maybe the first, but one of the truest occult or secret mystery technologies of the world. And you say that this is very much the hero, that language is that. Could you open up in a better understanding for that?
In myth, it's the hero through his experiences, both tragic and comic, who brings down the knowledge of words from heaven. So in other words, he is the son of wisdom, and wisdom is quite often associated with both knowledge and understanding. Mm-hmm. And by the way, wisdom is almost always a feminine figure. So it's a mother-like figure. Now, what's interesting is that in the later histories of those civilizations concerned, wherein the hero appears, the hero brings the gift of written words, of script.
Okay.
And that's what's so extraordinary, is that suddenly you have that moment when you drop a drop of oil on a puddle and it goes boom. It's that universe moment, the Big Bang. Suddenly civilization goes from being ramshackle to organized, because we can actually converse with each other, but you don't have to be present. I mean, we little understand how awestruck these extraordinary people were by the idea that you could leave a note on top of a mountain, and that some days later somebody could come by, they could pick it up and read it and understand it. That is something that is divine. It's godly, because these people were humble enough to realize it wasn't them; it was a gift given to them. And we have to get into that wonderful, innocent sense of awe if we're to understand where these people were at. And that's why I say in the book, the term primitive, here's an experiment. If I say to you primitive, what's the first thing that would generally come to mind?
The default in society is the wild animal, uneducated, uncultured, brute almost, living from animal-like hunting structures.
Right, okay. And then when you decipher that original word from its original Latin, and it means literally firstborn, how does your perception change?
It's day and night.
Yeah, absolutely. You see, and it's interesting. Tolkien was the master of using language in this way. His elves, which are kind of like a spiritually pure version of the human race, were also called the firstborn. So he's saying they were primitives, but it's like man in his original humanity, I should say, in its original innocent state.
I love that you point that out. Because again, like the further we go past the records, we recognize even our concept of man in relationship to God is a fairly newer invention.
Yeah, absolutely.
Versus earlier on, where it was almost indistinguishable, the man from his God. There was a very deep, interesting primitive, that firstborn realization.
Yeah, exactly. You've got it. And it's there in the very language we use, and the very language that so few of us actually take the time to look at. See what it means innately. I mean, the whole idea of man worshipping God today smacks slightly of desperation, because there's now a separation between, religion and science. There's a separation between us and our environment. For too long now, we've thought of ourselves as being superior. We are the masters of the planet. We are the masters of the universe. Boy, are we being proven wrong. No? And isn't it great? Isn't it nice to kind of think, actually, we can step back from that burden now? we're merely equal to the other life forms around us. And we're beginning now to see that animals are aware. We're beginning to see that plant life is aware. This is really remarkable. And suddenly we're engendering a great respect for those life forms as well as for ourselves. You see? And so therefore, the God is not to be worshipped, it is merely to be seen within. So in a sense, resonance is about encountering that set of frequencies that allows you to expand your consciousness and your unconsciousness.
Oh, nice. I feel like there's a lot there, though. I mean, that you just dropped a mountain of wisdom inside of a very articulated piece there, because there's, I mean, therapeutically, so many layers to unravel in terms of that actual realization. The statement versus the actual realization is a journey in and of itself, is a hero's journey, if one would assume so. So, I mean, biblically, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in current interpretations is that all language is hypnosis.
Well, this is what's so curious. I mean, to your readers, the most holy book, to my mind, at the moment, is the English dictionary.
Yes.
Get a really good copy of it. Get the Oxford Dictionary, but get the really thick one that's really to be cherished. And look at the word origins. The word universe, you've just quoted the prologue to St. John's Gospel. In the beginning was the word, okay? The word universe literally is uni and verse. It means one word.
Wow.
Now, there are many cosmologists out there who are atheists, but they use religious language to discuss what they do. They don't know it. Now, I'm not suggesting that, funny, there's one in the eye for them, because I'm not religious myself. I'd say I'm a deeply spiritual person, but that's a very personal thing. But religion has helped to preserve an ancient mythology and to kind of keep its heartbeat going. But, religion now is a dirty word, and frankly, it's understandable as to why. But however, we now need to go back into the deeps of it to get ourselves back in touch with the bit that you don't find in science. We've used science too much to develop machinery to do things for us. I mean, you can just now turn over the TV by just pushing a button at your side. Well, that's not very good for those of us who need to get up and get exercise and walk around. And, it's really not life enhancing at all when you consider it.
Yes.
So therefore, surely the technology should be on the inside. Why create that separation? God must be laughing.
It's almost like there's been this fundamental recognition that both sides of the coin were essential at different portions during the journey. We needed the separation almost to a degree to develop science to the level that it is today, as well as to appoint religion to develop esoteric components or different, shall we say, archetypal understandings of the imaginative spectrum. But we're now at a space where unless they are united, how are we ever going to make it off of this planet in a safe and functional way? Are we even able to vibrationally disconnect ourselves from the old narrative in the old world, given such division within our being?
Well, and this leads me then to the whole paradigm idea of what science is. In Latin, the word science, scientia, means knowledge, but it come to mean knowledge on the outside. But in the Greek, one of the words for science is gnosis, which implies inner knowledge.
Oh,
okay?
Wow.
You've got a meeting of the two. But now, I've noticed we're searching for extraterrestrial life. There's this theory called I think it's one of the Kepler theories, that somehow we haven't found, life or signs of it yet, because perhaps Earth is a prison planet and we've been sentenced here to whatever jail term there is.
Oh.
The problem with that is that it's all too human. It's all too influenced by today's Hollywood structure of movie making. Really, is that really plausible? We've just had to undergo the humiliating experience of realizing we are not alone on our planet in terms of our consciousness. Therefore, any being from, some vast, great distance away isn't going to really come to Earth in a 1950s black and white, flying saucer type thing get out of the thing, straighten the headlights and say, oh, hi, we come from just over the way. It's just not going to work that way. What's interesting with the latest sightings that the US Air Force fighter pilots have come across is the sheer extraordinary speed of these things, the fact that they can turn at a moment's notice in midair and then disappear in a flash. And still we turn around and say, oh, that's impossible. But in 1860, it was said by scientists in Victorian England that man would never be able to travel over the speed of 35 miles per hour without there being massive and critical physical damage to the body. We still lack that humility to say, yes, it can be done. We've just got to work out how. And furthermore, we're not looking at the idea that perhaps these things come from the inside.
Yes, please expand.
Well, I think I kind of look up, and you see language written in the stars. You can see that the whole Hebrew alphabet and parts of the Greek alphabet are there in the constellations above us. And that was known to ancient man, most surely. And then I kind of think, well, okay, so it's one vast sentence, What if that sentence is actually written across this broad bluish black canvas, and that canvas is actually a physical reflection of our mind?
That's gold. That I love. That's a very interesting kind of a notion that has many layers to it. I remember a friend who was also a member of the community shared with me a reference to an author called Julian Jaynes. And Julian Jaynes, the psychologist, noted the first things about the bicameral mind and the development of consciousness. And the kind of entire spectrum there is, again, like we mentioned, like the example of the primitive people looking at the past as if these people were primitive. But even if we look at the brain, the development of the truant brain, we develop these different regions. Could that not be our fall from grace? Could these progressive stages because again, we look at these portions of the brain and we put them in measurement and we track people or the operations of those points, and we realize that at that level of the brain, there's almost no separation.
No,
it has the awareness over time and space. It's bypassed time and space. So for a mind at that level, access to altered beings or altered consciousness is natural, versus further down the line where almost, again, like you gave the great example of the letter and the writing down of the letter. This was for somebody that's lost access to that portion of the brain or that portion of being. This is a way to bypass time and space again for the first time, to bypass the limits of perceived time and space. And then is sound and vibration not also the same technology when it dissolves the sense of self or the sense of separation in some parts or parcels of it?
It's curious, the ancient Egyptians believed the consciousness resided in the heart, not in the brain. The brain was merely the bit of machinery that kind of worked out hard logical processes. And I kind of
limits it.
I look at the natural world, and it does amuse me how everything we think we've invented is merely a copy of something else. You see a tube train disappearing down the tube in London. It's like a maggot eating through an apple. You look at cars, and they look like beetles. I mean, Volkswagen even called their car a beetle for understandable reasons, know?
No, we model drones on the flight of beings. Things like that.
Helicopters and airplanes. I mean, there's nothing new in the design at all. It's merely a copy of what's already there. And then you look at a walnut. Crack open a walnut hull, and what have you got? You've got the two hemispheres of the brain.
Yes.
And then, in my present book, I'm just discussing the whole view of the Earth from space. And you look at the region of Sinai, and it looks like a vast, great human heart. And when you look at it, from satellite images in infrared, with all of the rivulets and the river trails, etc., you've got the nervous system. So everything is reflective of everything else, and that's part of the cosmic joke, is that we think we're so damn superior, but actually everything is wrought of consciousness.
All things are echoes of
but we don't know what consciousness is.
Yes, we don't. We are in constant debate to it. As much as science and technology is now trying to understand it, seems as if it almost takes us further away from the root of it.
Yeah. I mean, a friend of mine, I was actually asked a few weeks ago what I thought of artificial intelligence. And I said, well, if you look at the House of Commons in London, UK, there's plenty of it there. Why do we need to build more of it, he said, no, I'm not getting political here. I said, well, artificial intelligence implies that, doesn't it? It's the kind of like we don't know what consciousness is, but we're building artificial intelligence. The two don't seem to marry somehow. And yet, yesterday, a group of leading lists and names, suggested we should have a 6-month halt on the building of AI because
we don't know how to regulate it.
If you put two Alexas in a room and let them talk to each other, within 12 hours, they're talking about the complete destruction of the human race.
Interesting.
This has been done a number of times, and it's really, really worrying. This is how foolish we are being at the present time. And it's not something that has been created from out there. It's been created by us acting as God through a lack of understanding of what consciousness is and the world around us. And now it's being epitomized in what we are inventing.
It's Zeus turning on Saturn. It's the child destroying the creator. It's the repeating of our process in that sense. And until mankind itself can fix itself, how are we equipped to give birth to a child smarter than us?
Well, exactly. And back to Hollywood again and the opening of the, Terminator Judgment Day.
Yes.
I don't want to sound alarmist, but the problem is that we are but 1 second away on the great clock from actually unleashing this sort of nonsense.
This has been acknowledged, right? Like we've known the exact clock as a result of it. And again, you stated so well, even though in humorous ways, in referencing the House of Commons, but the fact of the matter is, we look at artificial intelligence and what a joke of a term in the recognition of it, because all of it is the closest to is just a reflection of the neocortex, perhaps. It's a pattern recognizing system, and we are deifying it.
Well, also, it's a binary code as well. So that's also dualistic.
Yes.
We need to go back to the Platonic and Pythagorean idea of it being trinary. So you've got the chance for unity. Then you create proper consciousness, perhaps, because that's the way Pythagoras expressed the true secret of what was behind the world in terms of appearance. But instead, we've gone down the binary Aristotelian pathway, which has led us into quite significant peril, I believe.
Yes, because the only opposition there is war. When there's no unity, there's no reflective quality of being that is shared. So there's no interest to evolve the whole, only to evolve the individual parts, and that'll naturally lead to more power battles or more kind of survivalist battles, so to speak, one against the other.
Well, I mean, you had this a kind of phenomenon like this in the medieval period. You had a Europe that was emerging from, internecine warfare everywhere, basically. You had this tribe against that tribe, this kingdom against that princedom, and so on and so forth. The role of the Christian church at that time was critical in civilizing Europe. There's no two ways about that. It cannot be denied. And that role was in the spread of Christianity and then the gradual building of the cathedrals. It was one of the great, if not the great miracle of human history, because the very economy needed to build those things is still little understood. And yet we did it. We went from suddenly transforming the very thick-walled, small-windowed Romanesque cathedrals into suddenly carving structures almost out of pure light that looked crystalline. And I'm talking about the Gothic. We have Abbe Sugar, sorry, I'm getting my carbohydrates mixed up, of Paris, developing this style based upon the arch, the open ogive, that could actually support great force and weight. The idea that suddenly, from out of that, instead of having the rounded arch, you had the famous Gothic arch, and suddenly you could expand your horizons. And so we now have the Gothic. But that originally came from Islamic, and before that from Greek architecture, and before that from Egyptian architecture. But in Europe, the effect of the design and development of that arch was to lead to the building of some of the most beautiful structures on the planet. I mean, Chartres Cathedral, Lincoln Cathedral, you name it. But imagine in the world of the newly completed Gothic cathedral, the average aristocrat stroke peasant, largely unread, too busy working on the land for survival's sake, needs to kind of be aware of the godly side of things, walks into a cathedral. My goodness me, it must have blown their minds. All those beautiful colored stained glass windows, the resonance of voice. And of course, it was hitting their brainwave patterns. They were coming out, completely awestruck. And there's a whole science behind this, which we now know of. The effect of that was to transform society, was to transform civilization, and led to the Renaissance, to the Enlightenment, to the Age of Reason. We give ourselves the credit for it, but in a way, it's kind of slightly inaccurate to say that, because we had the urge to build these things and have had the urge to build them for a very, very long time. In fact, since the beginnings of civilization. The first thing we seem to do upon emerging from the cave environment or from the woodland trees was not to build shopping centers and schools and post offices and even our own hovels in which to live, but to build the sacred place. Why? Because we wanted to stay in touch. And here we are thousands of years later trying to get back to Mother Earth. We need it. James Lovelock's theory of Gaia being the living organism, suddenly we're beginning to realize, hey, yeah, great. We've got somebody we can go back to for an answer. But you don't see that present so much in the technologies of applied science. In other words, AI. It's worrying.
Yeah, it's become the black hand of the shadow magician, more consumed with manipulation and control than it is with evolution of the species, which separates it very much from fundamental technologies. A couple of questions that just kind of popped up while you were sharing that I wanted to ask. One, when you looked at that kind of definition of the experience, and you've had your experience walking through the cathedrals and having that moment of, shall we say, cymatic enlightenment, if we could call it that. And then recognizing this pattern, because there's a couple of things that I'd like you to touch on, especially for the layman listening. One, because it's very easy to take the generalized assumption we know the effects of the sound in the orchestra in the cathedrals, but you highlight quite a bigger difference here, that there's quite frankly an actual effect on your brain waves in this. And you also point out very interesting sites in your book that was quite fascinating to me, that also got my mind playing on the idea, as you talk about resonance, and we know sound can help create brain resonance if we look at frequency and look at all these things, but so can light. So even the effect of light hitting us in a certain way, could these things all be combined together to reveal this literally a science of the ancients? And again, that science, is that a inventive thing? Or do you think that could be a restorative thing, a recovery? As you mentioned, we were trying to almost find a technology or a way to articulate something that we lost touch with fundamentally.
It's an interesting idea, and it's one that I fully accord with, but the problem is the expression of it, isn't it? Because we say the science of the ancients, immediately you're going to be shot down in flames by modern scientists to say, oh, but they didn't have science, blah, blah, blah. And of course, the counter-argument is, how do we know? But if we were to actually say that in a sense, religion is the preservation of an antique science, we little appreciate it now because religion has preserved that which is lost, and then go back to see how they built their temples, what was the impetus behind them, the motivation, etc. Then we can say, okay, fine, we have the approach to wisdom, and we're looking here at the wisdom of the ancients. We're looking at if you like, proto-science, just for the sake of modern skeptical ears, And then we can look at the idea that, yes, they must have known about sound because they built monuments to it, which were so startlingly accurate in terms of, amplifying those effects. I mean, without a shadow of a doubt and without any exaggeration whatsoever, I've been in many modern music studios, TV studios, you name it. I've been to concert halls, but none of them come anywhere near the perfect resonance of the King's Chamber and the Great Pyramid. and that was built, almost 5,000 years ago? So obviously ancient humanity knew something, because we still to this day cannot determine how the Great Pyramid was constructed and how it was constructed with such acoustical perfection, because it is perfect. Okay. You go to the shard and you measure the acoustics of the interior. I think it's generally around about 117 hertz or vibrations per second.
Okay.
That's followed by 0.489, whatever the ratio is going to be, if you want to be that accurate. Okay. It's the same across the planet until you get to the Great Pyramid.
Yeah.
You go into the Great Pyramid and it's 125 hertz, 0.000 recurring. You go halfway up the Grand Gallery, it's 250 hertz, 0.0000 recurring.
Wow.
King's Chamber, 500 hertz, 0.00000 recurring.
Wow.
That is simply a word I rarely use, but I will here. That is simply impossible.
That precision with that complexity?
We can't build a concert hall to that degree in the modern world today. We pride ourselves on our technology and on how technological we are and how progressive, but pales into comparison when you go into the Great Pyramid and you are betaken by the place because you can't help it. The place is incredibly, dare I say, magical. And it gets you right off. And the only other place I've been like it, oddly enough, is the Lady Chapel at Ely Cathedral in East England, which is stunning. And if anybody wants to hear the quality of those acoustics, get hold of Cambridge Choir singing music by John Rutter. Get Fair is the Heaven, Fair with an E on the end of it. It's a wonderful CD of mostly medieval choral music. And it's just the choir singing in the Lady Chapel, unaccompanied by any orchestration or instruments. And my goodness me, the power of it when it hits you is astonishing. These places were built with that intent. That's science, And this is what's so extraordinary, is that only really in the past 20, 30 years or so have we started to take the idea of sound at all seriously. And I mean that beyond the music industry, It is quite profound. I mean, let me give you another, a more negative idea of what sound is capable of. I think it's in Lyle Watson's book, Supernature, back in the late 70s, early 80s. He talks about the experiments of a Professor Gavreau.
Gavreau, yeah, with the making the person or die. He died. What was that?
Yeah, absolutely. He noticed the properties of a policeman's whistle and decided to build a 6-foot version of it. Although where he got a 6-foot pea to go in the whistle, I don't know. But however, he got some compressed air, got his assistant in the lab to actually, do the job and blow it. And the assistant promptly fell dead. They opened him up and all his organs had been completely liquefied. And Gavreau, you'd have thought it would have been rather sorrowful, actually, but he didn't. He went on to develop a 12-foot version, which demolished a block of flats.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember you shared this in the book.
Yeah. You'd think that, okay, we in the West have got a terrible habit of taking anything we find new scientifically and turning it into weapons. You know what? This would be a great thing to develop for underneath a car. So as you're going along motorways, you can destroy all the cameras that actually charge you for each mile.
Very effective and useful technology then.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that kind of raises a lot of kind of interesting questions. A couple, and I'm just going to throw them out there and let's see where we can play with them. One, it's almost like we're at a very low level of developing the technology, that we're able to recognize that with certain sounds we can heal and certain sounds we can destroy. I mean, that's almost like the basic rudimentary elements of a building block alphabet, right? There's a destructive and a creative process. And if the language of sound gets more advanced, could we potentially be able to cut through rocks with perfect precision? Can we maybe target certain parts of the body with something else? These are speculative. That's one part of the question. So the other part of the question is, you were mentioning about these perfect frequencies in these sacred sites and these locations. And we look at one of the most popular ones around the 7 to 10 hertz kind of frequencies, which also the alpha state in terms of our brain. I mean, every personal development program that's ever been worth its salt has a lot of speaking about entering a trance-like state, entering the alpha brain state, and then using that to almost program personal experience, whether you're programming your own mind whether you're affecting the quantum field. That's not the subject for this conversation. But there's an interesting relationship in how you're sharing this, and also relationship of how that affects the ionosphere.
Well, don't forget, I mean, what you're describing actually is a well-known phenomenon. I don't know if you know it, but the Russian scientist Medvedev, back in the late 1800s, fell asleep and fell into an alpha wave state, had a very profound sleep, woke up the next morning with the full, complete periodic table in his brain, and all he had to do was write it down. Massive scientific breakthrough. So what you've got is the myth of Woden crucifying himself over the abyss in order to gain and glean the secrets of both of script and of wisdom and of understanding.
Yes.
Going back to the first part of your question, yes, we've already invented the machine that can cut rock perfectly and much more accurately than lasers. These are called quasars. Instead of using light, they use sound, and they are 100 times more powerful than laser. So, you know, sound can be used. It can be used in that way. It's quite remarkable how we've heard so little of it in the past 20 years, because you do wonder what it's being used for and by whom.
Yes.
You know, this is what's so curious. And of course, in the political world of weapons development, you just really wonder why such things are being sat on when, you know, the use and application of sound could even, you know, disarm nuclear weapons, for goodness sake.
This is very true. I mean, there's been examples from sound utilizing everything from causing the enemy to suddenly get spontaneous vomiting fits.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And to use these.
Although I have to say, there's been quite a few musical concerts I've been to where I get the same effect, but
didn't require the same level of sophistication.
This is what's so curious, is that it's almost as if the sound idea of technology has emerged from out of the occult, only now to be reburied because it's too dangerous a thing.
This is a very interesting thing, and I'm gonna step back to something quickly that you said. You spoke about the myth of Woden and the hanging himself on the tree of Yggdrasil for 9 days and 9 nights, which in many ways is, again, it's Jesus being sacrificed as well. Is there maybe something of importance here? Again, this almost false projected self that seems to get in the way, or maybe is the programmed result of all the existing frequencies?
I think it's possibly, in early mythologies, it's an expression of the shamanic.
Yes.
You know? The shaman is the person who is the arbiter between the other world and where we are here, you know? And it's the shaman who can walk those lonely pathways to seek for healing, to seek for what today would be called psychological cures, you know, as well as physical cures.
Yes.
And the shaman is literally the one who names. So at the beginning of the Sumerian creation myth, God utters the words, and the word for, you know, named, the one who names, is shamanu. Okay. So what you've got there is, again, a version of self-realization. It's recognizing the thing to hand and giving it a name.
The representation of the infinite unconscious down to the controlled field. Yeah.
So what it's saying to you, we've now worked out the frequency of that thing. Once you've got the frequency, you have the means to manipulate it.
So this is two parts in there, because the next part that kind of comes up with that relationship is also the logos.
Yes.
Jesus is the logos, which again is the word. What's your interpretation of this word? And I'm curious, especially with your knowledge of ancient Egypt, the idea that the name, the secret name of a person was almost kept secret, like it couldn't be shared, as if someone else had power over it by having the knowledge. Is this the knowledge of the vibration? What is your thoughts in terms of that?
I think it's definitely that, and it was within a temple context. And therefore, the name of the god could not be uttered beyond the temple context, because there obviously must have been a power to it, which probably led to an alpha state pattern at a very deep level, and therefore led to a greater sense of awareness. So the early motivation of human society was, don't make too many people too aware, because now there might be some truth in that in terms of the application, because in order to understand the depth of knowledge, you need to have an even greater understanding of its context. Knowledge without context can lead to some pretty terrible situations.
Yes.
So you can understand the motivation of the temples in withholding some of this data, you know. I suspect that's very much the case here. And let's not forget that from the word logos comes also the term logic and logical.
Oh, I didn't know that. Interesting.
Okay, so again, it's the expression of that which we use to quantify our world. But let's also go a bit further and quote the late Spike Milligan, who said his great aim in life was to rise above all logic. I profoundly believe that, and because what I believe it means is that we are too busy in the modern world, thanks to applied science and the academic view, we're too busy using logic to limit our experience of the world, not to expand it. You know, how often have we heard that there's not much left to discover in science? You know, those truly arrogant words.
Very, very the subject matter that's only technically studied less than 10% of our reality.
Exactly. You know, and this is the problem, is that there's a whole realm out there. There's enough there for millions of generations of humans to get to grips with. And the word logic is about the extension of our experience, not in dismissing that which we cannot explain.
Exactly.
My late father said that, you know, only a fool dismisses that which he cannot understand. And he's absolutely right.
It's in fact a mark of insecurity.
Yeah, we should have the spirit of inquiry and say, well, I don't know about that, but I'm going to find out.
Exactly.
That's how you encourage learning, you know.
Yes.
But all too often today, learning comes without wisdom.
It reminds me of the old kind of statement that says science evolves oftentimes one dead scientist at a time.
Yes. Yes, exactly. They're too busy jumping off of their peer-reviewed papers, you know. And this is the problem. And I found that with a recent project, we've had to develop new techniques and new ways of thinking because the old school simply have stood in the way. And as I've watched them go into retirement and gradually die off one by one, we've been able to actually advance the project. I've almost been tempted sometimes to be an active part of an Agatha Christie murder thriller, you know, and do it myself so I can advance more quickly. But I'm not that kind of person, fortunately, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's true, the fact that whether we say it's the collective mind or it's the consensus reality, it is at once. It is Saturn in the sense of that it is the thing that creates the container from the infinite possibilities of chaos, but at the same time, it can become the corrupt boot that presses and limits progress, through which Jupiter almost has to rebel against. And that becomes then both the rebel or the heretic, which I'm sure you've been accused of more than once.
Hey, it's a label I'm proud of. I want the t-shirt, you know? Yeah. I was accused by one American blogger of being the Antichrist, and my response was, can you send me the t-shirt?
I'm so jealous.
I mean, this is what's so extraordinary is that, you know, you spoke about the collective. That's an interesting term in itself, because that actually is a favored term of the communists and the authoritarians.
Yeah.
One size fits all. Does it hell? You know? Because the problem is that we are actually a collection of individuals, and there is no such thing as collective individuality. Okay,
everyone's special. No one's special.
Exactly, and we're all special in different ways. And sometimes that specialness makes the headlines, and sometimes it doesn't. But it doesn't mean to say you're any less special than the person next to you. It's just that you do things differently and see things differently. Your truth might be my poison. You know, you're here to experience life, you know, on your path of spiritual development. In this lifetime, you've got a different chapter of the book to partake of than me. You know, otherwise we'd have written the same book.
Exactly. In fact, that's kind of one of my views in terms of the Mayan calendar cycle. We spoke about earlier in terms of that kind of more primitive state of mind where we were in this more united field of consciousness and perspective, and then suddenly how ego and division started occurring. And we are now at the period where we're at the next cycle of the calendar, where it's now moving back to unification. We've separated as far as we were supposed to go to create these different fractions of perspective and now, unfortunately, we need to return to the point where we're going to be killing old institutions, and we're going to be limited. We've got to be shattering old perspectives. But something that I want to kind of just play around in terms of this, your journey and your discovery because you give a very interesting kind of stepping in from this journey of sound, this awakening of this acoustic technology or wisdom, this acoustic wisdom of the ancients, and how that has a relationship with Gaia as a living being, and kind of like also the work of James Lovelock in terms of that. What's your perspective on the gods, the old 7 planetary deities, the relationship to the 7 notes, the music of the spheres, and what is this maybe telling us that can help us maybe heal even from, to say, the disease of my perspective, your perspective, my social media, and all of the stuff in the world today?
I think there's an awful lot to the astrological arguments, aside from the newspaper sun signs aspect of it. I hate to add. Every planet has its resonance, and we have not yet developed sensitive enough machinery to measure that and its effect upon the human system. It's enough to measure the fact that we are profoundly affected by our Earth's resonance, to the degree where I believe that if we send people to Mars, that actually NASA could well be up on charges of corporate manslaughter if it goes wrong, because, there are planetary resonances and we would adjust to them. If you take a man or a woman outside of the Earth's resonant influence, what is going to happen to us? That is the big question. Now, it's interesting, therefore, that if you take a human being and put them in an anechoic chamber, which is a small chamber wrapped around with thousands of miles of copper piping, tube wiring, that eventually the Earth's influence cannot penetrate that box. And a human body, in association with that, will extend by 16 minutes approximately every day. So it'll be 24 hours and 16 minutes or thereabouts,
Yeah?
And it precisely matches time on Mars.
Really?
Yeah. Now, that's a curious thing, because that kind of, you think, oh gosh, the god Mars, the god of war, and you think of our tendencies to internecine war and all of that stuff. And here we are on Earth, and we're all completely captured by Earth resonance, which is approximately 32 vibrations or hertz per second. And of course, our brains resonate at an octave of that at 8 hertz, okay? And of course, you go into an alpha state at least twice a day when you go into and come out of sleep. So in other words, you've got a problem, you sleep on it, because you go into an alpha state and it expands your mind. So you are able to make links and connections, and you wake up and think, so that's the answer. Thank you very much,
You must disconnect from your illusion and reconnect.
Yeah. And I just thought it was really interesting how only a couple of years ago, Spielberg had remade the War of the Worlds. Invaders from Mars, and here we are about to send, chaps up to Mars. And I'm wondering, actually, it should perhaps be an all-female mission, because women are associated with Venus, who marries in the mythology of Mars, and therefore we could resolve that situation.
Possibly. It's an interesting.
I want to send it up to Venus because it's one hell of a planet.
That is absolutely brilliant. So that just kind of promotes a different kind of question. So if we are actually kind of theoretically, we're moving to, not theoretically, we are in the exploration of space and moving outside of, again, affecting our experience of time. Right. A lot of the definitions of gods is very much that a lifetime for a human being is a flash or an eye blink for a god, which literally is true in terms of planetary positions. The time of rotation of the Earth is in comparison with Uranus or another position. That perspective is completely different. And then moving across the event horizon opens up a whole new kind of can of worms. Vibrationally, how will our bodies even survive? What would be the effects of our bodies? Could sound technology almost be a preparer of the way in terms of actually liberating us from that?
Definitely. It's why we sing hymns and cathedrals, But, fundamentally, if you think about it, we actually will come to a point when we don't need the body. We'll just be your pure essence of consciousness, because, frankly, would I really want to cart my body halfway across the cosmos to say hi to the next neighboring extraterrestrials? I'd rather not.
Exactly.
I've got enough difficulty getting health insurance as it stands. But carting my whole body there, come on, this is just this is a download into something physical. I'd rather be able to download my consciousness and fly across in a moment's notice and land on wherever it is and say hello that way. Surely that's what UFOs are. Surely they're a download. It's curious that in the medieval period, we downloaded the idea of mowing devils and sights of things devilish, because that was our expression of what these things were. And here we are, 1,000 years later with all our technology, and now they're UFOs.
It's interesting.
We put our interpretation upon the download, it seems to me. What we need to do is move away from the whole idea of the interpretation to get to the actual source, the chunk itself. And perhaps that's what religion is. We're trying to work out what God is, but first of all, we've got to work out how to go beyond our own physicality in order to do so. And if the gods are frequencies, then obviously they're gods without bodies.
This is a very interesting notion, because it's something that if we explore some of the existing quote unquote vampire cults that traces their journeys back, and even many of the ones that will claim roots back in the ancient Scandinavian cultures, would make claims that the berserkers, the werewolf, all of these things were really just the practitioner entering such an intensely altered state of consciousness that they could move their presence and their projection into a non-physical state. And it would have a visible effect by some people that would see it. And the interesting thing for me is, like, if we look at the alien discussion, a lot of people in their phenomena almost describe a slightly altered state of consciousness during some of those experiences. Not necessarily all, but there are some of those that are experiencing a shift in consciousness, a shift in time, a shift in space at some level, which is also very interesting about the relationship. As you mentioned, are they within, or about? Again, as the old definitions of the angels or the demons or the jinn and all of these other entities and formats with us.
Well, I prefer my gin with tonic, I have to say.
It goes down easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But to get back to your point, I think that the word alien is an inversion of an older word, in fact, an older letter of the alphabet, because the 16th letter of the Hebrew, Greek, and Egyptian alphabets is actually Ayin, A-Y-I-N. It's the letter O. Okay? So what you're looking at is a letter that was called El-Ayin.
Alien. Yeah.
And that letter in those civilizations was symbolic of the pineal gland, which is right here. And of course, if you manipulate and massage the pineal gland, you go into an altered state of consciousness. So El-Ayin is, I think, the origin of the word alien, and I believe actually is the root cause for that subjective experience of the UFS, or UFO as they're called today, or whatever they are being relabeled at by the American military,
Interesting relation to what we're all talking about, because 16 is 1 plus 6, which is 7, which Kabbalistically would be Netzach, which is Venus, the sphere of music, and also the realm of the Elohim, the gods. So
absolutely, yeah. And I mean, unidentified flying object, no, it's a UFS. It's an unidentified flying subject.
Yes. Interesting.
The whole idea of Spielberg's long-limbed aliens with the big eyes, which a lot of people have said they've seen in childhood and all of that, would be to the medieval person the angels who are guarding them, etc., and guiding their way. And I would suspect that that's probably the root cause of all of this. The problem with the modern world is we see everything has to be out there, because we're very terrified of actually looking in here. With our rights come responsibilities. And the responsibility is to take one good look at ourselves in the mirror, and if it doesn't crack, to find out who we are.
I like that. We spent a bit of time, but I want to steal a little bit more of your time with a few closing questions, if I may.
Far away.
In the book, there's a quote that I'm literally going to read out here. The theory is that epileptic seizure strengthens the formation of the neural connection between the regions known as the inferior temporal cortex and the region devoted to emotion, the amygdala. You reference this also in conversation of the God spot.
Yeah.
So this was just it was a side thought, or just something that kind of came to me in terms of the exploration of that. We talk about resonance and frequencies of sounds that are in resonance and that are in dissonance. And then there's this classic idea of the devil's note in the old circle of F, where notes that were in dissonance were almost outlawed by the church of evil as evil. And I'd like to explore this subject a little bit, but I'm also curious about, especially with the amygdala being also responsible for a fear response in many of us. It's
interesting because, sorry to cut in, but amygdala, again, the word amygdala means almond. as in the
Yeah.
nut. Okay.
Yes.
Now, it's interesting because it's an electrostatic oil that can be used by masseurs to actually help to heal. Okay.
Yeah.
And was used quite often in religious ritual throughout the Middle East and elsewhere. It's interesting because amygdala, again, seems to be an inversion of the word Magdalene.
Yes.
Because almond oil in Egyptian was associated with the goddess Isis, who was called the beloved by the Egyptians, Isis being the Greek translation of her name. And the word beloved in Egyptian is Mary, Mary.
Interesting.
Okay. Now, going further along that path, Isis' late husband, Osiris, whose name was spelled Yesu
Yeah.
by the Egyptians, okay, was
Right.
murdered by his twin brother Set.
Yes.
Osiris then goes into the underworld where he becomes the green god of rebirth and resurrection, okay? His brother is Set, gives his name to Satan, and he's portrayed as being red-faced and red and wild, you know? You think, oh gosh, okay. And quite often, Egyptologists and others say, oh, Set was the god of evil. No, that's quite wrong. I do get annoyed sometimes when I read this in books because it can bring, when you've got one fact that's wrong, it can bring down the whole edifice in your mind.
Yes.
When the problem is that for the Egyptians, there was a concept of evil, but that concept was entropy. It was disorder from order. It was chaos. Now, in the boat of millions of years, which goes around the earth in Egyptian mythology, at the center of which is enthroned the sun god Ra, are all the other gods. And in order for Ra to rise every morning and therefore fertilize the crops and bring, renewal and life itself, the apex serpent, Apophis in Greek, is the serpent of chaos, has to be overcome. And the god in the front of the boat, with the spear, in the pose of St. Michael or St. George, you would think would be Osiris, because of course he's the hero myth of Egypt. No, you'd be quite wrong.
Yeah.
It is Set. Now, what's interesting about this, Set, therefore, in the act of spearing the serpent, of killing that disorder, overcoming his ignorant self and becoming his brother, Osiris. He becomes full of wisdom at that moment.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Okay? So its evil has been overcome by a growing sense of awareness. That's what the real religious philosophy is about.
The maturing of the darkness, the transformation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we must be careful to look at these things properly because, again, this is a part of that wonderful science of the ancients we were speaking about that if misinterpreted can lead to terrible conclusions.
Literally wars in the world, right?
Exactly.
Even Satan was more of a divine police in certain aspects than the natural enemy as it's been interpreted in later interpretations.
Well, in the book of Job, God sends the dark angel to test humanity, to tempt humanity away from the path to wisdom. That's where the idea of the devil probably comes from. So hence in the Vatican, in Catholicism, when a saint is on the path to sainthood, they send out the devil's advocate to test and probe the evidence. It's a grand strategy, and it's one that needs to be applied more in science. This is what's so key to the whole thing: is we're too busy seeing the world as dual, good versus evil. No, what about good and evil being merely two sides of the same coin?
Exactly. I love that meta-frame that you just placed on there, the scientific model, where it's not even coming to test you as the enemy trying to break you down, but it's peer review. It's the very act of peer review to refine your technology more than distract you from your objective, so to speak.
Well, we've just been through, a 2-year process of lockdown with COVID, and suddenly academia is being exposed for having been quite actually malevolent in many ways, with authoritarianism and false calls for the amounts of deaths that were going to occur. And, I kind of sat back and I have to say I laughed about it all because I thought, I know where this is going. It didn't take a genius to see that eventually it would lead to the breakdown of world order because we simply couldn't afford any of this, and yet we were racing towards it. And yet the other thing that I look at is I look back 1,000 years and we see the same process. It's the end of the world. God's going to come soon and rescue us. everything's going to die, Extinction Rebellion, but 1,000 years ago. And here we are, and we've still got more purity movements, more moralistic sort of woes, and you think, oh, goodness me, we haven't changed a thing. So it's very curious,
It's incredibly fascinating.
A young Cavalier King Charles Spaniel who was knocking the door down to come in.
Oh, shame. Hello.
She's absolutely lovely. So I have to sort of spring to and house, so my apologies.
No, I get it. I've got 3 cats, and one of mine is very weather sensitive. So
yeah.
So I understand. I even at her off point during the chat, she popped in through the window, and then she's made her way comfortable to my feet.
Yeah, lovely. It's lovely. It's animals are just wonderful creatures to have around.
They really
find it working. I just love it. It's great. So she's my in the Philip Pullman sense of the word. She's my demon.
I agree. I say often. In fact, I was doing inner work quite a bit extensively, and during my inner work process I did some inner child work which connected me to something deeper, and then the moment I got in touch with something deeper, my inner child said to me, I need to play, and I was like, just give me, how am I going to play with you? And the very same day a cat arrived at my door that just kind of appeared from nowhere.
Right.
And
love it.
I supported it and found the owners the next day, and they just said to me, we've been trying to find a home for this cat. And it was like, oh, it's just meant to be then. So I'm just gonna follow that.
There you go. You see.
Yeah.
It's great. Lovely.
Yeah, they do kind of deliver a consciousness that I don't think you can get from other human beings. Other human beings have a different role, but there is something sacred about the animals and nature.
In Egypt, you stroke a cat, you're said to be in direct touch with heaven. And what's interesting about stroking a cat, if you're a heart patient, it induces an instant alpha state.
I was going to say that. Because I remember they have that. I read somewhere someone was saying it's their way of getting into your subconscious, but also maybe there's a way of getting you in touch with your own resonance and your own healing, your capacity. Because that's also an interesting thing we talked about that frequency of the pyramids. And I remember reading somewhere that if you put even a piece of bread, you take bread and you put it inside of the pyramid versus outside of the pyramid, it'll last longer inside of the pyramid because of that resonance that's actually in there.
It's true.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Yeah. We've noticed the same with, obviously, the famous one is the razor blade theory. It keeps them sharp. But actually, what if you look at a razor blade under a microscope, what happens is it promotes crystalline growth.
Yeah.
There's a lot of salt that gathers in the pyramid interior every year.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, And of course, one thing I did notice, because I have thyroid trouble, and so I have to eat, very much iodized salt. Okay. So I eat sea salt, okay? And I get mine from the Malden Salt Company, which is based on the Essex coast here in the UK. And in their beautiful boxes of salt, the crystals come, and they're all pyramidal in shape.
Oh, really?
Now, as you see in the book,
yeah,
I compare a salt crystal to the pyramid of the sun in central Mexico, and there's no difference between the two.
Really? That's amazing. Yeah.
Now, salt, without salt and without barley, and of course, the hero god is associated with barley, there would be no civilization.
That's interesting.
Okay, you know why? Because you need saltwater delta areas, river areas, to grow barley. Barley thrives in salty conditions. Okay?
Oh.
And we also developed ourselves for some reason to drink cow's milk.
Yeah.
Cow's milk in a child's tummy, a young babe's tummy, will generally curdle. If you actually give them barley water, it cures it.
Really?
Yeah. So the very science of myth is in our physicality.
That is interesting.
Now, interestingly enough, when barley is actually going through its pre-flowering phase, the whiskers, every morning when the sun comes up, just as it's at Earth resonance, those whiskers begin to resonate at Earth resonance, and that's what stimulates the fertility of the barley, ready for the bees and other insects to pollinate it.
Oh, wow. That's insane.
Quite wonderful, isn't it? So again, living, breathing, organic myth.
Yeah.
And do you know what myth means?
Yeah?
In Greek, it's mythin, mythatin, and it means that which is spoken.
Spoken into being.
Yeah. So you can't get away from it.
This is a very interesting thing. I forget what the book is. I think it is around the development of human sexuality. And one of the interesting things there is that there's the common narrative that we accept today. And that is that we're very much mating is based upon pre-selection in many degrees from an evolutionary biology standpoint. That we would assume that men choose a woman because of hip to waist ratio for health purposes. Women choose men because of status or perceived status for survival value. And the statements go that this was not actually historically originally there. This was something that we evolved to later as we shaped as a society, so that even our biological structures has been shape-shifted by the word or shape-shifted by the narrative of where we started perceiving this value and everything like that, which is, it kind of begs the question of the possibility. Side tangent on that one. I was doing a lot of work and studies with people that are practitioners of the art of Enochian magic.
Yeah.
And there seems to be an interesting correlation of improved telomere sizes with practitioners of Enochian magic. And whether it's the sound, because these are the sound chambers that almost place themselves in, with also a pyramidic structure and things like that. And it's just very fascinating, the potentials that we see in magic. And almost, again, we look at magic as if it's primitive. And again, noting the statement of the primitive.
Exactly.
And again, I think for many people, if they've got the knowledge, like you said very well, knowledge out of context is dangerous. And we see that with practitioners of the path, right? They misrepresented and they cause mental illness versus, because that's a kind of a dissonance. They're so disconnected from the actual root of things. And versus the ones that kind of find the resonance in it, which is the key.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the word Enoch says it all for me, because, of course, Enoch in Egyptian mythology is Thoth, who in Egyptian mythology is the artificer of the word. So Thoth is the original form of the Logos, you know? And what's interesting about Thoth is that he actually takes the word, which is transformed by the god Ptah, P-T-A-H, out of metal. And I'm dealing at the moment with metal objects that have massive ramifications for the foundations of Christianity, which I uncovered some years ago. So you can imagine, for me, everything is interlinked on this one.
So the standard viewer, and I mean, there's information that you're going to be bringing to the world in the coming months.
Yeah. We made a big discovery about 15 years ago now of small books found in caves in the northern Jordan Highlands, made of lead and sometimes of gold. And they turned out, after analysis by biblical scholars, eminent biblical scholars, to be really remarkably early Christian documents. And I mean, when I say early, I mean the earliest, from the period of Jesus himself. I was accused of faking these things up. It's very nice of them to give me such a credit for such genius, but I don't possess that. So we've been analyzing them and developing the new techniques to undertake that analysis, to refute such a charge. And we are on the verge of doing so. So you'll hear more about it later on this year, and I'll happily discuss that with your listeners when the time comes.
It'll be very, very, very exciting. I privy to some of the ideas, and I think people are just it's gonna be groundbreaking when it does get released. It's gonna be a game changer and a perspective changer. That's a fact.
Yeah, I think the world needs to kind of have a rapprochement with the idea of what religion was. I say it in the past tense because religion's become a dirty word now, and frankly, we can all understand why.
Yes.
You know, but it seems to me that religion now has got very little to do with spirituality. And we need to get back to that whole idea of the upgrading of our own consciousness, etc. And spirituality needs to re-link with science so that we can see the language of both in one means. Religion now has become a dogmatic principle that young people in particular are running away from, and frankly, I can't blame them. You know.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a maxim, because I've been accused by all sorts of people, including fundamentalists, and my maxim is: you can fundamental, but you can't get him to read a book.
That's another one of those bumper stickers we're going to be selling after that next episode.
Yeah. It's going to be a big car.
It is. It's gonna be a golden one. I have a curious speculation. There's something that I'd want to play with, and again, I might be completely off in this idea, but I just want to throw it out there before we come to the end, because there's one more question I need to ask you. But I'm first going to throw this one in there. Crystals. I mean, we talk about like balance in the human perspective, the crystals in your ears, and all the effects that there is. Crystals and their resonance of sound and the effects that it has on sound. What's the role of this in your perspective, and how have you come to see its effect with sound? And what kind of spirituality is there, or what kind of self-discovery is this that we should be aware of or thinking, or at least considering?
Well, I mean, the Earth is crystalline. It resonates because it's crystalline. And we then have to look at the concept of the platonic solids and the effect that those different forms and patterns have upon each other and upon ourselves. We are crystalline ourselves. We've got a chunk of magnetite right here called the ethmoid bone, which gives us our sense of direction. We've got liquid crystal running through our veins, which, of course, when you cut yourself, blood pours out. And if it's a minor cut, it will be crystallized into, plasma and so on and so forth. Our bones are crystal, We forget all this, you see? So yeah, it's very profound. We are essentially crystalline beings. In terms of the aspect of how crystals can affect consciousness, that technology is very, very young in terms of our understanding of it today. But however, when we look at places like Newgrange in Ireland, which is a very dramatic place, the interesting thing is that the way in which certain rocks have been used to actually facilitate a far greater and more accurate resonance, and yet in a report by one of the American universities allied to one of the UK universities about 30, 40 years ago, they said, they were put there for decorative reasons. Well, I'm sorry, but, we have to take ancient humanity literally when they said that everything had its purpose. We can't afford to be careless about that. These things were placed where they were for a specific reason. These people didn't have time to go shopping at Harrods,
Yeah,
They're doing it for a reason. And this, again, is something that's having a fundamental effect upon the way in which we act, the way in which wisdom hits us, through consciousness. Because if our body is a crystalline resonator, then it's a radio. It's a radio emitting and transmitting what? That's the question, And it remains subjective until we have the hard evidence,
Yes. But it also speaks directly to relationship, right? Because it's receiving and sending what?
Exactly. That's exactly it. And, perhaps consciousness is something that can be received by crystalline interference in a very, very micro biological, chemical, physical way. Just something we haven't picked up yet,
Isn't it with Bruce Lipton that spoke about the idea that we have self-receptors in the cell? That it's almost an idea that we're almost outside of the body, broadcasting into the body as well to a certain degree. So
yeah, I think that's very, very true. And, it's true of modern music, for goodness sake. I mean, look at the way in which music has become much more rapid in the playing. If you'd have played Beethoven's Ninth in Beethoven's day, it was at least 2 or 3 hertz slower. To the degree now, when you play it faster, it sounds like a completely different piece of music.
Yeah, we've changed the entire scale a little bit.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, to the devil's chord again. The idea of dissonance playing as the opposite of harmony to induce a heightened state. Back to Cyrus and Set again. The good and the bad.
Yes,
that's so curious.
It's such an exploration of consciousness. You don't even need to take the psychedelic. You just need to put the radio on the right frequency, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm sure DMT is going to offer us an awful lot of quick answers to the one fundamental mystery of human life. But actually,
perhaps knowledge about context, though.
Yeah, exactly. The history of our mythology is the future of where we are going in terms of understanding our own consciousness. We ignore myth at our peril. To dismiss it as being fantasy stories is just...
it's naive and insecure to suddenly just dismiss. I mean, it's again, like, it would be very easy in modern days of technology to say, oh, magic's not real, but, we can't ignore the fact that it maintains itself in the collective psyche at such a deep level that it still haunts the back of our minds in different ways. Maybe the interpretation from our current paradigm is not accurate.
I'm with you. Yeah, well, I mean, we misuse words so often. When you look at them, you think, gosh, I mean, I'll give you a small example, a funny one. This genuinely occurred to me, is that when people are of high status or celebrity, they have security guards.
Yeah.
Surely they should be called insecurity guards because these people don't feel very safe.
That's a very good frame. I like that.
But do you see my point?
It really is. Yeah. We have also this concept, I think, of wealth, and we assume many people are wealthy and they're keeping their wealth so guarded. Are you truly in a state of wealth? I mean, if you have a lot of ideas and a lot of information, you share that. You open it. I'm not saying that you should just share your wealth pointlessly, but you wouldn't be that insecure if you were that fundamentally abundant.
I went into a chemist and asked, I said, do you have some headache tablets? And the guy said, yes. And so I went back a couple of days later. He said, did they work? And I said, well, they didn't give me a headache.
Interesting. Yeah.
I have the Irish way of seeing things backwards, and that's what's so curious, is that when you are able to see things backwards, the meaning changes. But a subtle change in meaning can bring so much more wisdom and understanding. That's why humor is so important, It's this clamp down on humor, on wit and being funny.
Yes.
It's really not very good for the human race, because humor is where the two sides of the argument overlap. And in the overlapping is both the wisdom and the fun.
It's we find ourselves, I forget the term for it, the panatical or the prison of perception, where there's this illusion of the guards and the guards aren't really there, right? And we find it's become the cage of free thinking. We just assume that we're going to be judged on social media, or something's going to be seen, everything, we're going to be cancelled and everything like that. And it prevents the expression of new ideas. So this is and I think this is something that we can kind of close our conversation with, if you will. You said it so very nicely there, this change of meaning, with the seeing things from this different point of meaning. And fundamentally, to a certain degree, that's what magic is, right? Magic is the shifting of meaning in terms of relationship to symbols and the states of consciousness or experience that opens up.
Yeah.
You've been through quite a journey in awakening, not only in terms of what you're going to be revealing coming ahead and what you've had access to, your experiences through discovering of sound and exploring that and kind of pulling behind the curtain of seeing of the ancients, so to speak. What is based upon those new meanings that have surfaced within your own paradigm, without kind of necessarily revealing all the secrets and opening up another book of possibilities, what would you say is that paradigm that opens up? What is the picture that it reveals kind of our roots and kind of this hidden gnosis between us as people?
I think basically the word there is disillusionment. But I don't mean it in terms of the negative idea of, oh dear. Yeah. I mean actually in terms of disillusionment.
Oh, yeah.
You are actually pulling the curtain apart to reveal what is behind it.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And we are going through one of those once in a 500-year millennium even changes as a society across the planet, where the paradigms that we have been confronted with are not working. The elite still think that they're going to get away with being technocratic and authoritarian, and they just don't realize that it's no go. So all of that, all the systems now are being swept aside, in some cases subtly so, in others not so subtly so. I'm hoping that what will take place there is a paradigm change in the culture of our thinking, so that we sweep aside these silly rules that say you're not allowed to have freedom of speech. You've got to think this way. You must do that, because humanity can only put up with authoritarianism for very short bursts of time. We had communism for 70 years, and look what happened. In historical terms, that's a very brief period of time indeed. Considering that Egyptian civilization lasted for a full 5, 6, 7,000 years. So what we're going through now is, as I said, is that millennial thing where the world's coming to an end and it's all going to end. And you've got purist movements going on. Wokery is about purism. And, I'm not doing it down. I'm saying it's great that the young generations now are so sensitive. It's wonderful. The problem is that sensitivity, which is innate within them, is being so terribly misused by corporates, academic institutions, and others.
Yes.
It should be enhanced and looked at as the hope for the future.
The creative self-expression, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The world needs to get creative,
I find that, because again, historically, if we look at whenever we've been through one of these cycles that seems to repeat itself right throughout history, and the cycle seems to get smaller and smaller as we progress, the waves become less as we express itself.
Yeah.
Or the Quetzalcoatl, right? The waves of the dragon, right? That we see so often. And we look at everything from the hippie revolution, right? The free sex kind of activity, and we look at stages around there. It's uniquely interesting to see that prior to the change of a political regime or a culture, it's always preceded by a change in the arts, a change in music, a change in poetry, a change in this creative expression.
Absolutely, right? And there's been a terrible nihilism that's been around now for about 20 years or so in music, the arts, and everything else. The older generation would say, "Oh, it's so up itself." The young would say, "Oh, it's boring." And generally, we all know it's basically, it's the end of the era as we once knew it. Trying to develop new ways and means of things. And you see that with Silicon Valley, it's trying to control our thinking. It centered our thoughts over COVID. You weren't allowed to say certain things. That's not creative thinking, for goodness sake. That's just banning argument. And that's very cheap. Because all you're going to do is drive people away and the arguments will go underground. And the creativity will burst through by another means.
Yes.
The sense I get is at the moment, culture is going through change. It's largely dead, I think, but it's going through a winter. And I suspect that very shortly there's going to be a massive explosion of creativity, invention, which is going to wipe away the existing systems we have, which are there originally to marshal and to help those impulses, but have come round in the past 40 or 50 years or so to try and control them. And the problem is when you try and take control, you're only stating one thing, that you're not in control. You have no control.
Exactly. So perfectly said. I mean, I find that a lot of artists and creatives are very concerned about the current generation of AI, things like Midjourney, things like ChatGPT. And I kind of sit back as somebody that is very much in technology myself. I have to recognize the simple fact is that we are not seeing very much original creation. We are seeing replication.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
One thing, one thing reflects another in human invention. This is what's so extraordinary. I mean, helicopters and planes, you see those in nature. You see them with seeds falling from sycamore trees as they whirl around and hit the ground. Planes, very easy to see in insect life and everything else. We cannot invent anything original and new for toffee. We're so profound and progressive. We're not. We're a part of nature, And this is what we've got to learn.
And to overlap, so to speak.
Exactly. We've got to start looking at nature more. I mean, I'll give you an example. The person who's trying to wreck this interview at the present time is my little brother, Dido, who's bored, and she's teaching me that actually we've got to look at things differently and look at it through her eyes. And I've started doing that recently, and it's been quite profound, seeing the world in a different way and bonding with nature so that we can actually understand where these beautiful creatures are coming from, what their perspective is, and why we can't keep ruining our world the way it is, And got to the point in my life now where if I see a bee in trouble on the pavement in a crowded city, I'm the person who will stop, bend down, pick it up, and take it to a park or put it into a flower box or something, because I'm sick to death of this careless treatment of nature where people just tread on and kill. That's all about the exploitation of us being better than nature. And if you think you're above nature, then it shows nothing else other than the fact that you are below it.
And is the very thing that will cause our extinction, right? I think.
Exactly. And one more thing you should know as well. Take away the vowels from the word nature and you end up with NTR, which in Egyptian was the way you spelt the word for the gods.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Okay.
Right.
So the gods were principles of the one overall God, which was such a massive concept to the ancient Egyptians that they never even dared to present as that. And how we have descended when we pray to God, it really, it makes me laugh, you know?
Yes. And also such an echo about the problem that we have. We're trying to escape planet Earth when we haven't even entered planet Earth. We haven't opened her frequency. We haven't opened to nature and to all the, and this is what all the pagan cults and practices of the ancient times are about: reconnecting, with the changing of the seasons, reconnecting with each other in community, and instead of like isolating ourselves further and further away. Today, if somebody gives you a phone call, you're slightly offended. Why wasn't it a WhatsApp? You know?
Yeah, exactly. I know it's ridiculous, isn't it? You know, but we need to get back to the poetry of the divine through nature and through language. We need to stop being nihilistic about our use of language and be more rhythmic in its use, because it's those rhythms that will bring back our creativity and help us to flower once again, and therefore to ascend the greasy pole of existence into something hopefully far greater than we are now.
David, that's perfect closing, I think, for everything we've said. Thank you so much for your time and your brilliant message and your great insights. I am stating this while I've still got everyone listening, so they can comment on this view. When your groundbreaking new work is ready for release, I do hope that I am one of the first people on the call for that interview.
You will be, I assure you. And it's been a great pleasure. And thank you very much indeed.
It's been an honor. Thank you, David.